Jeder Hörer weiß, das war das Tanzstreichorchester Bruno Droste, genauer gesagt aus Erfurt.
Bruno used to say the best art, the most important art, is the art of living.
He was a highly gifted musician and pianist.
Sehr stolz.
As a child, I was always very proud of my famous father. When I was in school, I could always say, when the teacher asked, "What does your father do?" I could say, "Orchestra leader and composer." That was interesting.
He was an artist, the head of a dance orchestra, and he was based in Erfurt.
It was, of course, a pleasant feeling to have a father who was so well known and so enormously popular.
We've all heard of Gershwin and Irving Berlin and Cole Porter and Jerome Kern, and we've not heard of Bruno Droste. So the question is why? And there's really only one reason why. He just simply didn't live long enough.
It seemed as if the music was coming through him, from the atmosphere, from above.
It was a type of string orchestra like Mantovani. Such sweet, beautiful, soft music.
It was popular music in the modern style that we had really missed during all the war years.
Bruno Droste was a great improviser.
And he could play. He had a hand stretch of 10 notes. Not many could do that. So he was quite the musician from the start.
Sure, the Americans arrived here within the mood, but we wanted to talk about Bruno.
Between 1945 and 1961, about 3 million people left the East, and their reasons were economic and political. It was often felt that they wanted to just make a better life for themselves in the West. The restrictions on people were felt very, very keenly. They couldn't travel, they could not do the jobs they wanted to. They were put into different situations, although with full security and there was not a material, they were not hungry. At the same time, they could not really eat or travel to where they wanted to. So this restriction in freedom was very important. At the same time, what was felt in East Germany then, and why the wall went up, is that you could not depend on who was to be there the next Monday when you started the new project in your factory or whatever. And it was very important for the state to be sure how they could plan.
When I first met Bruno, he was accompanying shows for the GI clubs in Nuremberg. I had an opportunity to sing for one of those shows, and he was my accompanist. I was in Germany studying with a wonderful voice teacher in Nuremberg. Before I lived in Germany, I had lived in California, where I sang in the Pagliacci Singers, and for 2 years in the San Francisco Opera Company. Opera was my passion, and I wanted it to be my life. I thought it would be fun to sing for a show like that, because I had very little contact with Americans at all. But when I got up on the stage, before I even opened my mouth to sing, a soldier in the audience mimicked an opera singer, ha, 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 ha. And I thought, how does he know I'm an opera singer? It threw me. And I didn't feel that I sang my best, but Bruno played beautifully. And afterwards, when the German chauffeur drove us to our individual homes, Bruno suggested some songs I could use for this type of repertoire. And he also told me that he could do an arrangement for me if I ever needed one. So I took his name and address. Right after that, I was asked to take part in a fashion show. And when they found out I was a singer, the program directors asked me if I would sing a song with the band. They wanted me to sing When the Saints Go Marching In, and for that they needed an arrangement. So I contacted Bruno. When I handed his arrangement to the band leader, he looked at it and he said, well, if this was done by the Bruno Droste, it has to be good. To pay for the arrangement, Bruno said, how about a couple of English lessons? So, in the course of these English lessons, we took a break, and Bruno went to my piano and played a very beautiful piece of music. He asked me if I liked it, and I said, Bruno, that is beautiful. It should be heard. It should be published. And he said, in fact, it has been published along with about 100 others. This was the first inkling I had that Bruno was very well known in his part of Germany, the German Democratic Republic, where he had his own orchestra, the Bruno Droste Dance String Orchestra, for whom he composed and arranged because he knew musicians so well and what they could do. This was similar to Duke Ellington, who also wrote and arranged for his own musicians. Bruno's first wife, Inga, told me that there was no comparable orchestra to Bruno's in that part of Germany. His sound was very unique. When you heard it, you knew that was his orchestra. He was the best known in his field, that is the leichte Musik, in that part of Germany. But he had fled from one day to another because of political statements he had made.
Bruno Droste was born in the town of Schwiebus, formerly a German town, now part of Poland. His family moved to Erfurt when Bruno was 14. Even though this move took him closer to the west, Bruno always said it wasn't close enough. The beautifully renovated buildings with their colorful facades would not have been recognizable to Bruno, who left during the gray years of communist control.
There was a competition for a song, and Bruno won. The teacher contacted his parents and said, "This young man has talent." So Bruno started at the age of 8 with piano lessons.
Alles eigentlich selber sich erarbeitet.
He was entirely self-taught. He really learned by listening, playing. He could sight read and transpose. He studied music theory privately with Professor Chilenzik. He had private lessons when he was almost an adult, so he could write down his compositions, which were already in his mind.
Damit seine Komposition, die sofort hatte, dass die umsetzen konnte.
When Bruno was in his teens, he was enamored with the folkloric sound of the accordion, so he took lessons with conservatory professors and became a proficient player.
Bruno Droste war Schüler eines Gymnasiums und spielte schon.
Bruno Droste was a high school student and played for the dances. And when we had a big ball, that was Saturday, the next day we went on what we called the hangover stroll.
Am nächsten Tag zum Katerpunkt.
That was a walk in the outskirts of Erfurt, and we stopped in a cafe.
Umgebung von Erfurt und wir besuchten ein Lokal.
There was a piano, and Bruno was there and played, and we all danced. And we thought he was wonderful, and everyone danced to Bruno's playing. So he was known in the high school in Erfurt, everywhere. He was well known.
In 10 Gymnasien überall war gut bekannt.
He was 18, I was 16. We already knew each other then. We got closer when I turned 18. Oh, we were very, very much in love at that time already.
Ja, in dieser Zeit schon.
He came out of the war. He was not directly at the front. He was always behind the battle lines. He was a meteorologist, a weather forecaster, and at the end was in a little corner of Norway. He was in Germany, in Italy, and in the free city of Rome.
In Italien und in der freien Stadt Rom.
At this prisoner of war camp, during lunchtime, the Nuremberg trials were being broadcast out in the open. And all of a sudden they stopped broadcasting them because I think they thought this was humiliating to the German soldiers. But a friend of Bruno stood up and said, "We want to know what those bastards did." Bruno said he was so proud of his friend because he was of the same mindset.
Bruno Droste and his good friend Kurt Gossmann dreamed of success and fame through their combined talents. Their plan was to form a publishing company called Drogo, Droste representing the composer and Gossmann the lyricist. Their friendship and dream were brought to a tragic end when Gossmann was killed on the Russian front during World War II.
Kam zurück, wurde entlassen zum England, also in Englisch.
He came back, was released to the British zone of occupation, because he didn't want to come directly to Erfurt. He had heard that things were not so good, and so he went to relatives in Versmolt. He went first to the English headquarters and made music. Then he came back to Erfurt and knew how to play boogie woogie. He was the first to play boogie woogie in Erfurt. It was stunning. I never knew this before. I was shocked at first because I only liked classical music or waltzes or tango. But boogie woogie was terrible.
Tango, aber Boogie war furchtbar.
I was a student, a music student at the Erfurt Conservatory, and it was a completely different life from today. We really made music. We didn't have any sheet music from the American soldiers in Erfurt to use for our repertoire. We had hit kits. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Hit kit notebook. They were songbooks with chord symbols and even fingerings for the guitar. That's the way we students learned American hit songs and American music.
At the age of 20, I started playing in Bruno's orchestra. It was a wonderful time. And above all, as my colleague Kuhne said, a good opportunity to earn a fine bit of money, to add to our small scholarships. The recording sessions, which we had in the Kaisersaal for Radio Weimar, were also really beautiful.
Im Kaisersaal, im Sender Weimar. Der war nicht auf dem Konservatorium. Der war mehr ein Autodidakt.
He was mainly self-taught and attained his high position because of his natural talent. And he worked very hard at it.
He began with an orchestra.
He had an orchestra here.
Did he put it together himself?
He had the Bruno Droste Dance String Orchestra. It was an orchestra that predominantly recorded music for radio broadcasts. They also played for a lot of shows and dances.
Sie haben auch hin und wieder mal Veranstaltungen gespielt.
When he had assembled the orchestra and it grew, he hired only top-flight people. To be in his orchestra, the person had to be a good soloist.
Without electricity, this gramophone still works just like in the old days. In fact, this is a composition by Bruno Droste, Visitors All Day Long, played by an orchestra that doesn't exist anymore, the orchestra of Heinz Kretschmann. Towards the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, I was boundlessly enthusiastic for music, for American music, at that time called swing. And I wanted absolutely to be able to play that on my instrument, the piano. It wasn't so simple. That has to be really studied and learned. Above all, heard. And then, I don't know today exactly how it happened, I went to Bruno Droste. And so I was quite simply a student. I had 1 or 2 piano lessons per week. It sounds so strange to say piano lessons, but lessons are correct in modern music as well, and so I had my first foundation in harmony and in improvisation.
Although we had a very nice time in Bruno's orchestra, it was also very strenuous. We went to the press celebrations with this wood-burning bus. There was no gasoline, no diesel, a wood burner. The whole bus stank of burning wood. But we went to the press celebrations. They were very cumbersome trips to many faraway cities. For example, Schwerin. We went everywhere.
Eines Tages war ich bei ihm und hatte eine Operettenidee. Der Prinz gemalt hieß das.
And one day, I was at his house, and I had an idea for an operetta. The Prince Consort was its title. It was somewhat modeled on the Dutch Prince Consort, who never would become king because his wife was the queen. Bruno heard the idea, was immediately enchanted, sat down at the piano and played it like in a state of ecstasy, creating one melody after another. I believe he played for 20 minutes from one tune to the next. Prima vista, off the cuff, it all had suddenly come to him. And then I said, "That's good, you should write it down right away." But Bruno answered, "I've forgotten it already. I can't remember it." The operetta never materialized.
Da sagte Bruno zu mir, das habe ich alles schon vergessen. Ich weiß nichts mehr. Und die Operette kam nie zustande.
During the 1950s, the Bruno Droste Dance String Orchestra regularly performed at the Imperial Hall, the elegant cultural center where Napoleon threw a ball for his friends and where plays by Goethe and Schiller were performed. This was also the setting for many recordings by the Droste Orchestra, broadcast from Radio Weimar. A truck with transmission equipment was sent from the nearby city of Weimar to Erfurt. These tapes were kept in the radio archives for regular broadcasting.
Jeder Hörer weiß, das war das Tanzstreichorchester Bruno Droste, genauer gesagt aus Erfurt. Bruno Droste sitzt hier neben mir. Mein lieber Kollege Droste, einen schönen guten Abend. Guten Abend, liebe Hörer. Nun, lieber Bruno Droste, die erste Frage ist ja ganz klar. Wie kamen Sie zur Musik?
Ja, diese Frage ist eigentlich schlecht zu beantworten. Ich bin leider oder Gott sei Dank musikalisch vorbelastet.
Na sagen wir lieber Gott sei Dank, nicht wahr?
Gott sei Dank.
Gott sei Dank musikalisch vorbelastet. Inwiefern? War Ihr Vater Musiker oder?
Und mein Großvater war sowas wie Dorforganist.
Aha, also an der Orgel. Der Großvater schon. Und der Vater war auch Musiker?
Nein, mein Vater nicht.
Aha, aber dann hat er sich also quasi auf den Enkel vererbt.
When Bruno was still in Erfurt, he praised very highly the voice of Fred Froberg, a young pop singer. Fred Froberg had a chance to sing a first live radio performance with the well-known band Kurt Henkel's. He brought a song to him and he said, "This is a new song, it's by Bruno Droste, and I would like to sing it. It's called Prélude d'amour."
In Fred Froberg's autobiography, he writes, "I have Bruno to thank for two important events in my career. My first live radio performance in 1948 and my first record in 1949. Bruno Droste's orchestra was engaged when Fred Froberg sang for the first time on the radio. Fred said, 'It was a great success. I was very proud, above all because of the praise from Bruno Droste.'"
Und war sehr genau und penibel. Und als Notwehr.
And he was very exacting, painstakingly so. He was a perfectionist. However, time eluded him, and so he was always late finishing the arrangements.
Immer zu spät fertig.
Einmal kam Bruno Droste ins Studio, früh morgens und zur Aufnahme. Wir waren alle da. Er brachte die Noten mit.
Once, Bruno came to the studio very early in the morning, to the recording session. We were all there. He brought the music with him and his score, and he said, "I couldn't finish copying the instrumental parts from the score. I worked the whole night. It was impossible. But the recording had to be done." Then he had an idea. He took a big pair of scissors and he cut the score into strips, the separate parts, flutes, oboe, clarinets, violins, and they were joined together, resulting in long strips of music, and we played from those.
Da hatten wir so lange Notenband und haben dann gespielt. Es war etwas lustig, aber es ging auch. So, ja.
It was pretty funny, but it worked. I still remember it. I haven't thought of it in years. This was such an episode.
Das ist dann später erlebt. Ja. Aber naja, so war das eben. Das ist so eine Episode.
I was born in 1948, and I knew my father for 10 years. Of course, I saw him relatively rarely, because he was so often traveling on tours, and basically he was only at home during his free time. During those times, I experienced a happy and friendly father, but during the rest of the time, he was just gone.
I had to manage the money and see that we had enough for the household. I had to be careful. I had to tell him, you can only take 50 marks with you every day, or something like that. Or, you cannot treat everyone and buy them beer. That doesn't work. We can't do that. I had to do that. Copying notes and managing the money, that was me.
Die erste Frage, Bruno Droste, die für die Hörer sehr interessant ist. Der Name Bruno Droste tauchte zum ersten Mal auf, glaube ich, im Jahre 48 im damaligen Mitteldeutschen Rundfunk. Das waren wohl Aufnahmen vom Landessender Weimar.
Ja, die Aufnahmen im Landessender Weimar fing ich an mit einer Swing-Besetzung oder Kleinbesetzung, wie man das ausdrücken will. Und das Streichorchester, so wie wir die Hörer jetzt kennen, habe ich erst 48, 49 entwickelt.
49, da war aber, glaube ich, dieses Streichorchester noch nicht so stark besetzt wie heute.
Ja, das ganze Tanzstreichorchester bestand hauptsächlich aus 2 Geigen.
Hauptsächlich aus 2 Geigen, das war ja immer schon alle an. Und seit wann besteht das Tanzstreichorchester in der jetzigen Form etwa?
Im letzten Monat des Landessenders Weimar hatte ich meine Besetzung vergrößern können. Dann kam eine kleine Pause durch die Umstellung des Rundfunks. Und als staatlichen Rundfunkkomitee hatte ich die Möglichkeit, mit der jetzigen Stärke, das heißt 21 bis 23 für Tanzmusik und 28 bis 30 für Unterhaltungsmusik zu arbeiten.
Jetzt eine Frage, Herr Droste, haben Sie eigentlich nur Orchesternummern aufgenommen?
Nein, ich habe versucht, in Thüringen auch mit meinen Solisten zu bleiben.
Ja.
Und da habe ich wirklich eine sehr gute Sängerin kennengelernt. Das ist die Frau Traute Blecher.
Ja.
Und zwar hat Frau Traute Blecher hauptsächlich mit dem Walzer, heute ist ein Feiertag für mich, von Luther Audiers, ihren Start gemacht.
Ja, und dieser Walzer war jetzt auch ein großer Erfolg in Berlin, wieder lauter Trümpfe. Ja. Auch eine der meistgespieltesten Aufnahmen, mit Recht.
Heute ist ein Feiertag für mich und alle Leute freuen sich. Heute könnt mein Herz voll lauter Glück zerspringen, zerspringen.
The music of Bach was Bruno's inspiration for jazz, and Tchaikovsky was his role model for strings. He told me blues music could not really be written on a page. It didn't fit on a line or a space, but blues musicians know how to play it. Everything was inspirational to Bruno. He told me that when he was in Erfurt, there was a blackbird singing in his backyard, and he took that melody of the bird and wrote a composition on it that he called Stolen from a Blackbird. He wrote, when his son Mickey was 3 years old, Intermezzo for Mickey, which described in music the many facets of the little boy's personality. For his daughter Angelika, he wrote Angelika tanzt. So he got his inspiration from everywhere.
This next song is very interesting, Orange Moon. It has a distinct Latin flavor, and of course, Latin music was extraordinarily popular all through the world. In fact, I think that this is a little bit more interesting and less commercial than some of the Latin tunes that were popular around that time.
Bruno Droste's temperament was not suited to living under a totalitarian regime. At the end of World War II, with Hitler and the Third Reich vanquished, to his dismay, Bruno automatically became a citizen of another dictatorship. It was probably inevitable that he would flee from a system that monitored all artistic works.
Bruno was a rebel. He was an iconoclast. He was somebody you couldn't pin down with your thumbs. He talked a lot about music, about what good music should be. And he didn't like the fact that lyrics were ordered to be positive, upbeat, and happy. Even if the song were to be written in a minor key, the words had to say, "We're so happy tonight." It became trite. And for this reason, he wrote many of his compositions without lyrics. He was disgusted by the strangling of his creativity.
At the beginning, there was Heinz Putz, the first big band before Kurt Henckels, who conducted the radio orchestra in Leipzig. They always played American arrangements, very expensive. There was a drummer called Merkel. They were playing on the IGA, that is the big stage in the gardens in Erfurt. He played in this orchestra, and the drummer, Merkel, got drunk and sang "When the Red Fleet Sinks into the Ocean near Capri," instead of "The Red Sun." So for that, the Stasi packed him off to Siberia for 15 years. And I met him again when he came out of Siberia. And because of that, I became the drummer after Merkel for Putz.
Noch eine Frage, die all unsere Hörer sicher interessiert. Welche Pläne haben Sie nun für die Zukunft? Ja, ich möchte hauptsächlich die Tanzmusik weiterentwickeln, helfen, wie anderen Kollegen auch im Staatlichen Rundfunkkomitee es tun. Vielleicht auch ganz besonders einen neuen Stil der konzertanten Tanzmusik entwickeln. Und wenn sich die Möglichkeit bietet, wonach besonders eine Nachfrage besteht, neue Bühnenwerke, musikalische Komödien zum Beispiel oder heute zu schreiben. Ja. Und was natürlich ganz besonders mein Wunsch wäre, mit meinem Tanzstreichorchester in einer vergrößerten Form die Sachen zur Uraufführung zu bringen. Ja. Jedenfalls unsere Hörer werden feststellen können, dass Sie eine Menge guter und wertvoller Pläne haben für die Zukunft. Ja, wenn ich meine Entwicklung betrachte, ab 47, als Sie da beim Landesländer Weimar anfing, waren mir die besten Möglichkeiten gegeben worden, mich weiter musikalisch zu bilden und Unterstützung auch dann später durch die AWA, wo ich als Komponist meine Tantiemen bezog und so weiter, gaben mir die Möglichkeit, mich wirtschaftlich etwas unabhängig zu machen. Und diese Zeit fällt natürlich in die Regierungsperiode der Regierung Kohl. Und wenn ich in die Zukunft blicke, so glaube ich bestimmt, dass unsere Regierung weiterhin den Kulturschaffenden weite Perspektiven eröffnen wird und meine Pläne fördern hilft. Und deshalb ist es für mich eine Selbstverständlichkeit, dass ich am 17. Oktober meine Stimme für den Frieden abgebe.
Bruno was playing for a dance in Berlin. He started with his favorite boogie woogie, and there was a young crowd, and they all came around and shouted, "More, more, more." Then the music controllers took over. They closed in on him and said, "That will be enough of this Western music." So, completely disgusted with their approach to what he considered wonderful music, he stood and gave his opinion of their music criticism. He did it in such a way that he knew he would never be allowed back in East Germany.
Stalin had said the artist is the engineer of the human soul, which of course gave enormous power and influence to artists, writers. Jazz then, in this new line of argumentation, became a tool of the capitalist West. It was not to be used and to be played for this development of the new socialist personality. What was favored instead was folk music, traditional music, operettas, and of course political songs from the East Bloc.
He went back to his hotel, he got up the next morning, took a taxi to the American sector, explaining that he had to do a recording for the radio in the American sector. He went immediately to the refugee office and signed as a refugee.
Ganz plötzlich war Bruno weg.
Yes, suddenly Bruno was gone. All that beautiful time was gone. The orchestra stayed together in some form, and Dieter Brandt took it over. I really don't remember now.
Weiter treib ich die Herde, weit in die Steppe hinaus.
Had he stayed after this very heated exchange, political exchange, he would probably have had to pay a fine first, and then he may have lost his artistic status in East Germany. He would have lost his orchestra, and he would have been barred from public performances. There are several cases in literature I know of where people had been just forbidden to perform publicly.
Ich habe Bruno noch besucht. Das war unser letztes Zusammentreffen, als bereits...
I visited Bruno. That was our last meeting when he had already fled to West Berlin. I was already in Berlin and took the streetcar over and went to see him in his rented room. It was our last conversation, the last time I saw him. I don't know who gave me the address, but anyway, we had a good talk. There he was, starting over from the beginning.
Der war traurig.
Ja, natürlich.
Yes, of course he was. Of course, it was very problematic and difficult. He didn't know exactly how things would continue.
But I think one can say Bruno was a stand-up guy. He was a man who always found the strength to bounce back. He had experienced quite a few setbacks, which happens to all of us, but he always succeeded in bringing himself up again. It was his talent that helped him. He was very well educated. He knew a lot about history and so forth, and that helped him a lot.
After the fall of the wall, it was very difficult. There were no more big halls and no big orchestras. There were financial difficulties. It was impossible for us to get established in the western regions, and there were hardly any big orchestras left. Although one must consider one thing, the people there were struggling themselves.
When Bruno left in September 1958, he could just walk across the street and be in the Western Zone now. It was just a free zone. Nobody was turned away. According to West German law, it was 2 states and 1 nation. And your citizenship depended on the nation, not on the state. It was then, after 1961, a crime that was punishable by being shot at the border. And there were some cases of border guards refusing this order and other ones enforcing it. In January 1958, just a few months before Bruno left, the Ministry of Justice issued this ordinance for the programming of entertainment and dance music. This is the notorious 60-40 clause, and that meant that 60% of all music had to come from the GDR and East Bloc countries, and only up to 40% could come from Western countries. Now you ask yourself, how could that be controlled or monitored, right? All of these different pieces had to be submitted in writing, okay? And you were not sure whether there would be somebody in the audience to actually control what was being played. Sometimes there was, other times there wasn't, but this written culture of control was enormously there.
So he had really started his life all over again. He was in the West, but his family was in the East, his wife and his 2 children. They felt he should try to come back, that he should try to regain his old job, his orchestra, his reputation, but deep down he knew it wouldn't work.
When Bruno applied for an immigration visa to the U.S. in 1968, friends and colleagues of long standing wrote statements that attested to his political philosophy and his extreme desire for artistic freedom.
The description of the circumstances in the German Democratic Republic convinced me that his flight from the GDR came from purely political motives.
His opposition to communism went so far that he left the German Democratic Republic in spite of having a very good position there, in order to work freely as an artist.
He suffered greatly because of the Kulturpolitik of the time that, according to his often expressed opinion, misused art for political goals.
He sacrificed his career over there, and at first, gained nothing but his freedom.
To make ends meet, Bruno took odd jobs in bands. He enjoyed playing piano, but the performances did not include music by Bruno Droste, and this went against his spirit.
Das war im ersten Programm des Westdeutschen.
When Bruno and I met, it was just an acquaintance at first. It was never a crush. It was more of a meeting of 2 souls. It was a bond. And so for me, it transcended romance.
Bruno and Doris were married in September 1963. It was a gripping time. The Berlin Wall had been completed, and all crossing points between East and West were closed.
Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Doris and Bruno lived in the little town of Wolkersdorf during the time of President John F. Kennedy's visit to Berlin. A few months later, they heard the terrible news of his assassination.
Bruno and I had had a lot of disappointments. Neither one of us was seeming to succeed in what we wanted to do. So we decided to try for an audition with one of the big floor shows for the U.S. Army. We traveled to Stuttgart to do this, and we didn't win. There we were, very close to Switzerland. And Bruno said, let's go to Switzerland. So with the little money we had, we traveled to Zurich, and right away Bruno was enthusiastic and said, isn't it wonderful to be in a country that's never known war? As if somehow the air was fresher and purer. So we went on to Geneva and then to Lugano to visit radio studios where we thought we could find work.
A new start for both artists began in March 1963 at the NCRV radio station in Holland, with Doris singing Bruno's arrangement of Magic Town and the beautiful folk song Shenandoah with the Metropole Orchestra.
Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you. Away, you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you.
We decided to move to Brussels because that was more of an urban center where there'd be work for both of us. We went to the home of an older couple who had an apartment to rent. While we were sitting there, Bruno said, "I see you have a piano." I said, "Bruno, we don't even know these people." But they said, "Let him play, let him play." So he went to the piano and played in great ecstasy, and the people were delighted, which just shows that he could never let a piano go by without playing it. Bruno was an intellectual. He was very curious, and he had a great deal of learning about history. He was able to draw. He drew cartoons of himself, mostly as a bumbling clown. He could laugh at himself. He had read this little poem, "Einmal ist der Ruf ruiniert, lebt man völlig ungeniert." Once your reputation is ruined, you can live completely without embarrassment. He would say that and he would laugh. But I think deep down, this was a means of his coming to grips with the sadness of his past. Bruno told me, no matter how happy or upbeat or allegro a piece of music is, it has to have an element of melancholy about it in order to be great. I thought this expressed his own personality, because as funny as he could be, there was always an element of sadness about him.
Bruno and Doris found their talents appreciated in both Holland and Belgium, and were busy arranging and recording for Sky Masters, the Desires, and the Divertimento orchestras at the Dutch AVRO station. Doris was asked to perform in the Flemish television spectacular Sweet Mystery of Life in honor of the singer and actress Jeanette MacDonald.
One of the things that Bruno coaxed me into doing was writing lyrics for his songs. I said to him, "No, I can't do that," but he cajoled me into doing it. First of all, there was a song that had never had a lyric, and that was what I called Magic Town, and we performed that song with orchestra in Nuremberg and in Holland. The second song was an English version of Prélude d'Amour, which was called in English, So Is My Love for You. So with that and about 8 other songs, he had 10 English lyric songs in his portfolio. After we moved to Brussels, we were able to save some money, and we took a flight to New York. We made appointments with music publishers on Tin Pan Alley, and in every one of those offices, Bruno sat at the piano, tipped his hat back, and I sang his songs. Many, many people were interested.
Tune, the Soothing strains come from afar. Listen, my love, and you'll know that my heart says hello.
He began to reorganize his life. He was a disciplined person, anyway. And he made contacts with this radio station, that radio station. Everything started to go well for him, and his career started anew, too. Bruno had a very serious sinusitis, and in fact it had to be operated on. When he was able to leave the hospital, he came home, and the first morning he woke up at 6 a.m., went to the piano, and played his composition, 100 Sunny Days. He played it so softly, gently, sweetly. It was the most beautiful thing I ever heard. And it seemed as if he was saying, I'm so glad to be alive. The morning that Bruno died, he was in a very good mood. He said, I have to go to the Belgian tax office today. I better bring a sandwich for lunch. And he laughed when he went out, but he left his hat on the bed. I didn't hear from him all day, and when I got home from work, there was a policeman waiting for me at my door. He wanted me to go with him to the police office because my husband had had an accident, he said. Finally, I saw the police commissioner who wanted to ask me questions about the death of my husband. And I said, no, this isn't possible, no. He regretted greatly, he said. He didn't know that I didn't know my husband had died. He had gone out, he had been on the street, he died on one of the busiest streets of Brussels. And we never knew, because an autopsy was not taken, if he died of a massive heart attack or from a bad fall.
If my father had lived, I think, with his composition skills, he would have been completely capable of composing new works or rearranging his old works in a modern style. And that's why it's so sad he had to die so early. But of course, that can't be changed.
Deswegen ist es bedauerlich, dass so früh sterben musste, aber es ist nicht.
In a magic town, stars were shining down, diamond fruit on a velvet tree. But they paled as I turned to see wide eyes of black that bewitches me to this day. So time cannot take you from me. Every soft summer starlight is It was long ago, still I'll always know your caress in my kindest dreams, and the glow of your face just beams, smiling out of every midnight blue. In a place set apart, you will live in my heart through the magic of memory. No time cannot take you from me. Every soft summer star